Welcome to Cancer Talks, a podcast sharing personal stories of transformation from people whose lives have been touched by cancer. My name is Claire de Laszlo, and today I'm chatting with my co-host, Cheryl Buck. As we head into season 2 of the podcast, we thought it would be nice to tell you a little bit about ourselves and share the origin story of Cancer Talks. Hi, Cheryl.
Hi.
I'm really looking forward to this conversation today.
As am I. Yes.
Overdue that we talk about how we started and who each of us are, because a lot of our audience doesn't really know why we're doing this work.
That's right.
So my name is Claire de Laszlo, for anyone who isn't familiar. And I came on working with Cheryl as a social media and digital marketing person.
And that turned into
a lot more. We'll get into that. And who are you?
I'm Cheryl Buck, and I'm the founder of CancerTalks.
So now I am producing CancerTalks Podcast. And I really feel like we're partners in this work. And
Absolutely.
Neither of us have an easy time describing what our roles are.
That's right.
But we're doing Cancer Talks in some way.
That's right. That we know. We have a logo. Yeah, and we do that.
Yeah.
I think because it keeps evolving,
It does. Yeah.
And it was just, it started with a couple of years ago, 4 years ago, 2018, with, let's change the conversation around cancer.
Yeah.
That's really how it started. Then it became a podcast just 1 year ago. So 3 years later.
And it's always expanding.
And it's changing. always looking at what is it? What's its purpose? What difference are we making? What difference can we make?
Yeah. And I think the beginning of my work with you, and the reason that I'm still here, because your website's fine. I did the social media stuff.
That's right. We're on Instagram.
Yeah. But I'm here, the way I see it, I'm here still because the first week that we started working together and we were just talking about logo and branding and what we want to change, you asked me from a place I could tell was very genuine what I thought of what you were doing and your mission. And I don't remember how you phrased it, but you just genuinely wanted to know how I saw your work.
I remember that. Yes.
Yeah. And I was
very forthcoming.
I was. I was going to say, I wasn't actually surprised somehow, but I felt invited. And I felt like you really wanted to know what I thought, which was
I did. Yes.
Very affirming, just a great trusting way to begin a working relationship.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And I wrote you an essay.
Yes, you did. That's right.
I wrote a sort of, post-development critique of nonprofits and a whole lot else. I don't remember exactly what I wrote, but too much. I wrote too much. And you called me and said, can we talk? And because there's just some things I don't quite get what you're saying. But, we understood each other to a certain degree, and we keep having those conversations and understanding each other better. But basically, we had entered into this working relationship of constant dialogue about what we're doing, why we're doing it, the structural implications of what we're doing, the histories. And that's why I'm still here. And also at the time that we were having those initial conversations and redesigning the website, you and Kate Almenrud, who you were working with at the time, a really crucial founding member of Cancer Talks.
Yes.
You were working in this mode using the word murmurations from Adrienne Marie Brown's Emergent Strategy.
Right.
So I came in this time where you weren't creating that much, you were thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And the last little thing I want to say about the way that I came to work with you was there was this question, we want to change the conversation, but how?
Mm-hmm.
And after a lot of conversations trying to get on the same page about the political context of this work and lots of different, who was the demographic, what was the goal, I felt like we were ready to just try something. So I said, how about a podcast?
Yes.
And as you do, you said, let me just be with that. And
I said that. Okay.
And you did. And eventually we were ready. I don't know. And we just tried it. And now since March of 2021, we've been producing podcasts about every 2 weeks. And this is Cancer Talks.
Yes,
so
it
that's
is.
my side of the story.
Yeah, it is.
And what's yours?
I want to add something to your side of the story.
Yeah.
I think that what I find fascinating is the way that the things that you talked about, or the way you talked about things. And when in that first couple of meetings that we had, and of course, that I use it now too, the phrase, it's a generational thing, which
I do say that.
So I don't take that now anymore as it's an age thing. I think it's a generational thing. And I think that what's really interesting is that you had recently graduated from college. So you had, and I don't know how many years it was, a few years. And so you were immersed in looking at things in a sort of, in an educational way. And you had like all of this, what I'm going to say, new to me, way of talking about things and context for things and ideas about what's going on in the world, which I was, in college several decades before you were. And I was in design, art. I got into college on home economics. So that tells you how many generations.
Yeah, that's generational. That's a generational thing.
That is a generational thing, right? And at least in the classes that I took, we didn't have these kinds of conversations. So I hope that I'm catching up with you in this way of looking at the world. Now, I have my own way of looking at it that's come recently. But I cherish the way you look at the world and that how you share it with people. I really appreciate that for many reasons. But one, it fits perfectly with what we're doing in Cancer Talks, as we're going to talk about as we go along here today. So I just wanted to say that.
Thank you. Yeah, and on an intuitive level, I sensed from the beginning that even if there were generational differences and a lot of semantic differences or language I used that was unfamiliar to you, I could tell that on a base level, we wanted the same thing.
Yes.
We have the same spiritual desire for the healing of the world.
Yes.
And so we're always figuring out how to align what we're doing and how we're talking about it with each other and with that base desire.
That's right. How we're talking about it and what we're doing about it.
Exactly.
So we're going to talk about what you're doing, which I only really learned about in more detail a few days ago. So I'm excited to hear you talk about that again.
Yeah, we had such a wonderful conversation of hearing more about our own work that isn't explicitly Cancer Talks and how.
That's right.
Ways of living, really, like the way that our way of being aligns.
That's right. Which, as we realized, is what Cancer Talks is all about.
We did realize that.
Yes.
So we'll get to that. We're really building it up.
That. That's right.
It's on the tip of my tongue at the end of every sentence. I'm almost saying it. But we got to get
oh my gosh. Okay. All right. I'm ready. Where do we go from here now?
Well, Cheryl, I'd love to hear your cancer story.
Okay.
What inspired you to start what was Cancer Story Project and what became Cancer Talks? And how did you first encounter cancer?
Okay. Well, I first encountered cancer about 9 years before I got a cancer diagnosis. And I picked up a book I don't know where it came from. I don't remember buying it, but I remember reading it late at night. My son Jack, who turned 29 today, he was 14 and 13 or 14, and he was down the
Wow.
hall. And I'm reading a book called Death Be Not Proud. And it's a book that John Gunther wrote about his son Johnny, who had a glioblastoma brain tumor. Johnny
Mm.
was, I think, 16, around Jack's age, 14, 15,
Wow.
16.
Yeah.
And Johnny was getting conventional treatment, medical treatment for the glioblastoma. And Johnny's mother, like any mother I think would do, is continue to not, and fathers too, but just to see what else was out there. What else
Yeah.
could they do for Johnny? And she came across a doctor who had a practice in New York City. His name was Dr. Max Gerson. He came from Germany, and he opened up a clinic in New York City where there were beds and people lived there, people who had been sent home to die from cancer, and he brought them back to life.
Wow.
He wrote a book called 50 Cases of 50 of these people that he treated, and he had a specific way of doing it. It was really, he said, I can't treat your son if you're going to continue to give him chemotherapy, because what we don't want to do is poison the body. What we want to do is to um, uh, feed the body nutrients, vitamins, minerals, and all that, and then give the body what it needs so that it can heal itself. That's his basic premise. And
Yeah.
I love this. I want to just tell this story about Max Gerson. When he was a little boy, he lived with his grandmother in Germany during the school week, and she had a big garden by her house, and she had a gardener. And one day, the gardener came to her and said, "Well, there's this new product that people are using. It's a fertilizer for gardens that is supposed to be really good. Shall we try it?" And she said, "Well, okay, why don't we try it on this side of the path? And on the other side, we'll continue to fertilize the way that we have been doing it with compost and natural products." And so after the gardener put the fertilizer on one side and left the other side the way that it was, uh, Max Gerson was 8 years old, and he was watching these worms on the path between the two pieces of property. And the worms were crawling out of the side that was fertilized with the newfangled fertilizer, the chemical fertilizer. And the worms were crawling across the pathway and then going into what they recognized as, perhaps, I don't know what they were thinking, but I think this is better for us on this side with all
Yeah.
the kitchen scraps and all that. So that story is what really got me thinking seriously. And then the whole book that John Gunther wrote about Johnny, I knew when I finished that book, if I ever got cancer, which absolutely was clear I never would,
Yeah.
if I ever did, then I would look up Max Gerson. He was not alive when I got my cancer diagnosis
Mm.
in 2016, but that stayed with me for 9 years.
Yeah.
So when I did get the cancer diagnosis, like I think everyone else who gets a cancer diagnosis, I was shocked. I was semi-hysterical. I had the thought that I was going to die.
Mm-hmm.
And that went on for a few hours. And then I remembered, oh, wait a minute. Remember Dr. Gerson? So I started doing research on how I could do that protocol.
Yeah.
And that's what I did for 2 years.
Well, the Max Gerson story, I just want to talk about a little bit more because it contains, of course, the reason that you decided to use the Gerson method for your own treatment, but it also contains this origin, or I don't know if it's the origin, but it contains a thread of what you care about and what you want to do with Cancer Talks, which is the connection between cancer and the state of the environment.
Yes.
And I guess these worms weren't getting cancer, but Max Gerson is a person who sees the connection between environmental toxicity and cancer. And I've heard this worm story before from you, but I wonder about your relationship to climate change, environmentalism. Before you read this book and before your cancer diagnosis, how did you relate to the environment?
I didn't even think about the environment.
Really? Did you eat organic? Did you?
Okay,
Anything?
well, actually,
You had a garden,
now
right?
that you say that, yes. I didn't think about the environment the way we think about the environment today. I thought about it on a personal level.
Yeah.
So I had, I think it was around 2000 that I discovered the Weston Price Foundation
Mm-hmm.
and Sally Fallon and the work that Weston Price did. He traveled around the world with his wife in the 1930s over a 10-year period. And he was a dentist, and he noticed that the people coming through his practice, their teeth were getting worse and worse, more cavities, pulling out more teeth like that. And so he decided to go to communities around the world that had not been influenced by Western civilization. In other words, they were eating their original diet. And what he found I think he went to about 15 different places, high up in the Swiss Alps, off the coast of the United Kingdom, places like that. And people were eating the diet that they'd been eating forever. The Maasai in Africa, they were eating milk from their cows and blood. And that was the basis of their diet. And I love the ones in the Swiss Alps. My mother at one point thought I should be named Heidi. And my dad stopped that. But I really relate to Heidi, living up in the Alps, eating rye bread and cheese. I could have a diet of that.
Yeah.
And today, people say, "Oh, don't eat bread," and cheese is fat, so you don't want to eat too much of it, or butter. So. Anyway, I was just completely enthralled and intrigued with learning about Dr. Price and then the Weston A. Price Foundation, Sally Fallon, and she wrote a book called Nourishing Traditions, and I started cooking from that and reading not just recipes, but she talks about the principles of a Weston Price diet. So anyway, you asked that question. I forget that I had this absolute fascination with food, and eating organic just came naturally as a part of that. I couldn't, and to this day, just cannot believe that people spray food. Anyway.
Well, and what's exciting to me that is not always the central focus of Weston A. Price or Sally Fallon's work, but what I think is so important about those case studies of what people are eating is that it's not about fat or rye bread or berries. It's not about the specific foods. It's about the fact that those foods grow where the people are living.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's about thousands of years of growing in relation to each other. Yes. The food, the game, the people, where it's a diet developed before the separation of humans and nature. Right, yes. Which we talked about.
Good point. That's a very good point.
Right.
Yes.
So it doesn't exactly work. No one's the same. And especially in a country of immigrants and settlers and people who've displaced the indigenous population here, there's so much diversity in each person's digestive history and genetic history. And no one thing works for everybody. And it doesn't always work when we try to transport a diet from a very different ecosystem onto our bodies. It especially doesn't work when we try to get like the goji berry antioxidant blend from across the world that's not even organic, right? So what's interesting to me is not the foods, but the history and the context of eating in relation to place and eating in
Yes.
relation to all other living beings around us.
Mhm.
We'll get to that more, but
That's right.
that's,
And
yeah,
eating in season.
and eating in season, right?
Even yes,
Which
right.
if you're
Yeah.
eating what is grown on the land, there's no other option. Right?
That's exactly right. Yes.
But I guess the question still remains, at what point in your cancer journey or your life journey did you
Mhm.
start to understand food as a structural, political issue and its relationship to cancer rather than just lifestyle choices that you were making for yourself?
Okay, that's a very good question. I'm going to say I think I really started to see this as from a bigger point of view, bigger picture,
Mhm.
when I started to learn about the soil.
Yeah. The soil. I mean, I even think about you've spent a lot of time reading about colonial displacement and genocide of indigenous people on this continent as well,
Yes, that's
right?
right. Yes, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that comes to mind is that the indigenous tribes in the southern part of the United States
Mhm.
around the time that the people were coming, including my great great grandfather,
Yeah.
across the United States in covered wagons.
Yep.
And there were settlers who just felt entitled to wave their hand at the Native Americans and take their land and divert the river that was the lifeblood
Yeah.
of these people and take it for themselves. And so then they couldn't grow anymore because they didn't have the water, and they were healthy. They were eating, corn and squash and beans, and had a healthy communities. And then not too many years later, the indigenous people were overweight, they were malnourished, and they were basically eating what the United States government was giving them. So when I read that, and I think I read that in a book called Why We Get Fat. I'm trying to remember his name. A journalist, investigative journalist, wrote the book.
Do you have a one sentence version of why we get fat from that perspective of displacement and estrangement from the land?
Yeah, it's not because we eat fat.
No.
That's what people think.
Yeah.
You get fat when you eat fat.
What is it?
Uh, and because they couldn't grow anything. So they're eating processed foods, basically flour, like you said,
Yeah.
that's processed. And
What if it's the fact that there's this rupture between where people can't work the land and feed off the land in the way that they used to,
yes, well,
right?
that then changes their entire lifestyle,
Absolutely.
right? Yeah,
But I think it's the rupture and displacement and um, losing the connection to
to the earth.
providing your own food, producing your own food,
Exactly.
right? It's not
Yeah.
carbohydrates because,
Okay.
the Japanese are not fat. They eat rice. That's a carbohydrate, right?
Yes.
Um,
You see, there's
um,
that college education.
yeah.
Yes.
um,
No, I think you're absolutely right.
right.
Absolutely.
It's
Yes. Yeah.
there's
Very, very well said. Very well said.
yeah. So Cheryl, you've been diagnosed with cancer
Yes.
and you freaked out and then you went to Gerson. But I still feel like I'm missing a piece of the story because now we know a little bit about your framework about environmental destruction and the relationship between that and human health.
Yes.
But there's another piece because we talk a lot about personal transformation.
Mm-hmm.
There's a spiritual aspect to our work,
Mm-hmm. Yes.
and healing on a spiritual level is so important to what we're doing. So, what's the
Yes.
story of that for Cheryl? What aspect of your cancer journey, or even just of your life? Maybe it's before cancer.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, how did you come to feel that cancer had this transformative potential, both individually and for the collective?
Yes.
And what's your own experience of
Mm-hmm.
transformation?
Well, I'll start with personal transformation around cancer. I think almost anybody who's had a cancer diagnosis would say that it was a shock and a wake-up call.
Mhm.
Okay, is this the end for me? Just had it was a wake-up call, and people had different ways of being and acting after that diagnosis. And for me, the wake-up call was definitely a wake-up call, and I would say that is personal transformation. I am not the same person today that I was in 2016 when I got my cancer diagnosis.
Right.
One of the things that a friend of mine and a person who I've worked with on Cancer Talks, or what was Cancer Story Project, I told her that I was an indoor cat. That's how I saw myself. I stay inside. I don't talk to anybody. I just mind my own business.
Wow.
And so then I've transformed from the indoor cat to the alley cat. I think there's another cat in there somewhere. I have to ask her what I called myself, but just an outdoor cat, just out there in the alley, swinging my tail and
Talking to people.
Talking to people, right?
Digging in the soil.
Exactly.
Finding your food as it naturally appears in the environment.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, yes. I just learned that, well, I am a cat person. I never was until I ended up with a cat that my son brought in from the driveway next door. I became a cat person then. Anyway, let's not talk about that. So I was working for the Hunger Project until my son was born, which was 29 years ago today. I'll say that again. And then I was a mother.
Yeah.
But even as much, I loved I still do, being Jack's mom. And I loved, cooking. I did a lot of, obviously the Weston Price cookbook, was big part of my life. I still had this passion to do something that was in alignment with helping people achieve optimal health. And I worked with a company that it had to do with supplements, but that was not like a full-time job. So,
Yeah.
but that passion to do something, that's probably directly the result of working at the Hunger Project. I just had to do something. I couldn't just sit home, or I did it from home. So I did sit home. But anyway, that thing, the Hunger Project just is so embedded in me. That kind of work to really work from a big picture, a global picture.
Yeah. Something that I've never asked you is, why do you think you got cancer?
Well, I do think it was stress. That's what I keep coming back to when I look for myself.
What do you say is the main stressors?
Relationships. Yeah, it was. Part of it, honestly, I didn't know how to have a relationship. I was never taught that. I was never modeled that.
Almost no one is, right?
Yeah, that's true. That is true. Yeah. And, it wasn't another person. It was me. And the stress really that I put on myself, I didn't feel like I was understood. I didn't know how to have somebody else understand me. I didn't know how to, what I was used to was somebody telling me what to do.
Yeah.
Okay, when I was working in the working world from college on, or as I was growing up, somebody would tell me what to do. I would do that.
And you were good at that, right?
Yeah, I was really good at
You
that.
did exactly what people asked you to do.
I did.
Yeah.
I did. Mostly.
Yeah.
For the bosses that I had before in the past, if any of them are listening, I know I didn't do everything you said to do, but mostly. So when, in my marriage, there was a lot of tension, and I had no clue how to deal with that other than basically what I'd been taught, or witnessed in my nuclear family,
Yeah,
which somebody recently said, that's a very apt name for that that family
it
system, the
is.
nuclear
Yeah,
family, right?
it's a bit scary, huh?
Yeah. So I was just under a lot of stress, and Jack was grown. So it wasn't, he was not living with me. So it was just in me. It was this,
Hmm.
I didn't know this concept of codependence
Yeah.
and making things work for other people and forgetting about myself, and also thinking about that I knew what was best for other people,
Hmm.
and telling people. I just didn't know that. I did not have that way of thinking, way of acting, way of being available to me. So, and just to go forward in time, I mean, I think, well, I think that just that whole way that I was created just enormous stress.
Yeah.
And I really do believe, I absolutely believe that that's a big thing in why I got cancer.
Yeah. It's interesting to hear you talk about you. You keep returning to yourself,
Hmm.
kind of like I was the problem.
Hmm.
And that just makes me think of isolation. Isolation is something we talk about a lot
Oh,
with Cancer
yes,
Talks.
that's
And we
right.
talk about it as the origin of cancer, which is to say, as we have been talking about the separation of people from their food source, from their land,
Hmm.
that's a certain kind
Hmm.
of
Hmm.
isolation. The
Yes,
nuclear family is a certain kind of isolation in itself for
absolutely.
people,
Yes.
separated by freeways in their suburban bubble.
Yep.
But I also hear isolation causing cancer for you in the way that you narrate it as your problem. Like your relationship wasn't working because,
Yeah.
you know, because you were just stressed out. You couldn't figure out how to
Yeah.
fix it. But that's an isolated position. There wasn't, for whatever reason, there wasn't room for you to be in a relationship of healing.
That's exactly right. And as you were saying that, I was thinking about the other people that I know, across the country, who were in a similar situation.
Yeah,
This that isolation
yeah.
it's rampant.
And this is pre-COVID, right? This is when
Yes,
everyone's allowed to be with each other, with their masks
exactly.
off, seeing each other, over at each other's houses all the time. Kids are having sleepovers and
Right.
right,
And yet there are so many people that feel isolated.
right. I
Yes,
mean, the
exactly.
structure of isolation predates COVID
Yes,
by
definitely.
centuries. I mean, it's like
Yeah.
this march toward more and more isolation that we've been
Yeah.
the Western capitalized world.
Yes.
That's not actually a word, but I just used it for the world under capitalism. Um, yeah,
Hmm.
thank you for sharing that. And I also
You're
want
welcome.
to reflect back that, yeah, Cheryl as Alley Cat, you're
Yeah.
definitely living a much less isolated life. I actually met you, a few years after your initial diagnosis. I met you as someone who was very social and doing a lot, and especially just talking to so many people. You're
Mhm.
always like going to dinner somewhere, having someone for tea in your garden, or, just I had to draw a line when I first came on to work with you to say, like, I'm sorry, I can't manage your social schedule. I'm actually just here to produce the podcast, but I did get a little glimpse into it, and it's so beautiful. It's the opposite of isolation. Um,
Yes, that's right.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, so that's one version of Cheryl's transformation, right?
Mhm. Yes.
This experience of yours through cancer really brought you into relationship and community with so many people.
Yes.
Yeah,
I have so many friends that I
that's
love and
so
adore.
cool.
I know, it really is cool. It is
Yeah,
very, very cool.
congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. I'm compelled to tell a little bit more of my story, not along the lines of cancer, because I haven't received a cancer diagnosis, but along the lines of isolation.
Yes.
And I'd been living in California in my hometown of Point Reyes, which is way out there, with someone I was in a relationship with. And a year before I started working with CancerTalks, I moved to New York because I could sense on a gut level that I put myself in a situation of isolation, which upon moving to New York, I realized was not just Point Reyes, but was also my relationship itself, that we were perpetuating an isolated dynamic. Too much time with each other, getting in the way of being in loving relationships with other people, with friends. And fast forward, having put myself in the middle of one of the densest places in the United States, I'm proud to say that I've found my way out of isolation, even in COVID, or especially in COVID, really. And what I'm working on is a community space called Mending Shop. And I mend clothes. I co-own the space. I don't own it. I hold the space with a friend who's an herbalist. We have a Thai body worker here. We host small plant business who stores all their plants here. We have a fire escape garden, and we ferment a bunch of stuff, and we just say yes to other people around us who are trying to find ways out of isolation. We're a space where people can come together, and especially we find ways that money doesn't have to dictate what's possible. Because in my own life, I notice the ways that having a job is one of the biggest causes of isolation, or having to have a job, especially in the COVID world or a computer work world, the way that working can isolate people. And as a person with family money and the resource to make this community space where people don't have to pay to be here, I'm able to fund it. That's just been a really amazing way to fight isolation.
Yes.
Um,
Do people show up at the mending shop? Like just the people in your neighborhood? And is it a
usually
gathering place for
it
people?
is a gathering place. It's a gathering place usually by way of, like, we're in contact with, we meet people, we invite people over. It's in a home. The second bedroom is where my best friend lives. So it's not like a storefront where people walk in, but a lot of gathering. On an average day, there are 2 people who don't live here in and out working on something. Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah. And I just bring that up because Cheryl and I are trying to figure out how to combat isolation. And stated in the positive, we're trying to figure out how to create a context for collective healing. And the other day, are you ready?
Yes.
We kept people waiting long enough.
Okay, go.
The other day we were talking about our work. I got on the phone with Cheryl because every few months, Cheryl starts feeling, and this is a really important driver of our work and the continuation of this dialogue and CancerTalks as an organization. Every few months, Cheryl gets this gut feeling that we need to reassess what we're doing. And she's like, what are we doing? Why are we doing it? And I'm like, come on, Cheryl, it's amazing. Like, I know exactly why we're doing it. And she's okay, but can we just talk about it? And in our most recent conversation, I started from a place of feeling like I needed to be able to talk about the effects of capitalism on people and the relationship between capitalism and the disconnection with people and land, and the way that over centuries has affected our health, which in some cases causes cancer. So I needed to be able to talk about industrial Western centuries old moment when people started working in the factories and started being separated from their land, and how that has continued further and further and further to a world where most people don't grow food and most people have to work a job and pay for their food that way. And where it's really hard, and for many people completely inaccessible, to have green space, to have organic, fresh food, to have time to cook, all
Mhm.
these things.
Yes.
Those are not lifestyle choices in many cases. Many people don't have a choice to
Mhm.
change the way they eat because of their financial situation. And this is all because of capitalism. So, in our conversation the other day, I brought this up because I felt like it's really central to the work that we're doing. We need to be able to talk about that origin. And I shared about my mending practice because I do that not just to fix clothes and keep fabric waste out of the landfill, even though that's important, but as I'm doing it, I think about this concept of world building, where maybe we can't end capitalism today, and maybe we can't totally change the Western medicine relationship to cancer. But we do have some choices about how we spend our time, how we show up for each other. And I like to think about that as world building. So with my mending shop, I'm building a world where people connect with each other as they take care of their clothes, where we think about where the clothes came from, the labor that went into them, the material resources that went into them, the pollutants that were put into the environment in the process. We can think about all of that and try to find ways to dress ourselves that don't contribute to those systems. We're not toppling the system, we're not really solving the problem, but how can we be with each other in a different kind of relationship that embodies a world without capitalism or embodies a world where we're not separate from nature?
Mhm.
And so in our conversation, Cheryl, how did that how do we reframe that into what Cancer Talks is doing?
Well, I just want you had me think of this quote from Buckminster Fuller that I've heard decades ago, where he says something like, "You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To
Mm,
change something, build a new model that
yeah,
makes the existing model obsolete," right?
absolutely.
Yes, and that's what you're doing, and that's what you're talking about. And so what we're saying now is this the time now to say what
Yeah,
we're okay. So what we see is, I'm going to say, the essence of Cancer Talks
yeah,
is embodying a world without cancer. That
yeah,
is available to each individual person to be in a way that we embody a world without cancer. And out of that, we're looking at ways to embody a world without cancer.
yeah,
And interestingly enough, they all apply to this huge problem that we have, which is the climate conversation.
yes.
And I've even heard people say that, we're not too many generations away from extinction if we don't do something about this. And this is obviously then it's the biggest conversation on the planet,
Yeah.
that a lot of people are engaged in. And everyone can play, everyone can participate in
So
this.
what are some ways that you, Cheryl, embody a world without cancer?
I think one way that I embody a world without cancer is this knowing that I have, or this strong feeling
Mhm.
that we can turn the climate crisis around, that we can heal the planet. Now, remember, I was a person who thought we could. When I came to the Hunger Project and I found out that it was about ending chronic persistent hunger around the world, I thought, oh, yeah, we can do that.
Yeah.
So that's how I feel about this. Oh, yeah, we can definitely do that. Um, so I think, let's see, how do I embody it? Well, that is, I think that's having a mindset or a way of thinking that this can be done.
Mhm.
So that's one way.
That's one way. I think
Mhm,
about many things we've already touched on, the way that
mhm,
you maintain relationships,
mhm.
connect with people, connect
Yes.
with people, making yourself available to hear their stories, which is the majority of what Cancer Talks does,
Mhm,
which is already creating a context for collective healing.
mhm,
You have a beautiful garden, I've heard. I haven't been
mhm.
there, but You connect with the land that you live on.
Yes.
You cook. You know where your food comes from. You connect with farmers.
Yes.
Those are some ways in which you're embodying this world without cancer.
Yes.
And when we talk about embodying a world without cancer, that language is very intentional because we don't think that, for example, through the podcast, we're going to completely end cancer now. That's
Right.
not what we're saying.
Right.
But we do think that it's possible for people to come together because they have a shared vision of the world and to start living that way, to start living in ways that are healing, in ways that are supportive to ourselves, our health, and our collective health, even while capitalism is still existing, even while much of the pharmaceutical, medical world doesn't think this is important, even as they march on offering only chemo and radiation and neglecting other modes of healing. We're going to be here knowing that it's possible to stay connected in a world that wants us to keep isolating.
Yes.
And yeah, we're here embodying a world without cancer and inviting anyone to join us in this world and build this world with us.
And I want to just talk a little bit or just tell people about who don't know this book called Inflamed by Rupa Marya and Raj Patel. They talk about deep medicine and the anatomy of injustice. And the big takeaway that I've gotten, and you've gotten, and people who've read it, as they talk about deep medicine, it's recognizing that health exists beyond individuals. So hence the community, and it's not just the community of people, it's the community with the world, with the planet, with the rivers, community with the forests, community to see that we're all dependent on each other, right? Can I read this little part of this was a podcast that Claire and I've listened to with Rupa and Raj, my new best friends. We're on a first name basis now. So Rupa was speaking at the end of this podcast that we listened to, and she said, deep medicine is recognizing that health exists beyond individuals. Health is an emergent phenomenon of systems within systems working in their optimum state. So we can try to get health as an individual, but we will not be successful as we would be if we were getting health for the whole community together. And she said, by that I mean human in more than human communities. I mean the water and the air and the microbes and in the forest. So deep medicine is understanding how all those things must intersect to create health. And we have to open our perspectives and our ways of knowing to all the keepers of deep medicine, the doctors and the healthcare workers, the farmers, our frontline indigenous grandmothers that are standing up against the pipeline line 3 right now, that these are all people working for health. So there's an opportunity for everyone to participate in individuals' health. But that point that she makes, that as an individual, it's harder to get health,
there's a
to
limit.
Get to health. Yeah, there's a limit.
Actually, some people get lucky, right? They live to be 100 because they were just focusing on their own health.
That's right.
But that's not it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. Yeah, and it makes me think of, we're using this word embodying, which I really like. But I think, especially in the Western framework, when someone says body, they think of one person separate and divisible from everything else, right? Like my body, and I'm gonna eat well and exercise and I'm healthy.
Yes.
But when I talk about embodying a world without cancer, or embodying a world outside of or above capitalism, part of embodying it is always asking how I can help the people and the living things and the non-living things around me also embody that world. How can I bring other people into this practice?
Yes.
Because if I'm not asking that question, we've just found ourselves back in a different state of isolation.
Exactly. So you are embodying a world without cancer with your mending shop, which is trying to, I mean, and that's all we can do, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you're in Brooklyn. You have I think you said like a 5-block radius that you are in community with, and that's what we need to do. I mean, I'm here in California, south of San Francisco. I live in a neighborhood. I know my next door neighbor, but we haven't talked for 2 years except for a few minutes over the fence, you know. But even before that, just before COVID, we were in Cancer Talks talking about that health happens in community. That's what we were saying couple of years ago. And I mentioned I just happened to be at my mailbox at a time when 2 families were walking by in either direction that live on my street. And I said, we should have let's have a block party, you know, get out there. And then we all got locked up in our houses. So anyway, hopefully, see, you're still doing that in Brooklyn. So,
I mean, even if it's not your actual neighbors, right? You are finding ways to be with people.
That's true.
All the time.
Very true. Yeah, that's true.
And so this embodying, it's not absolute. It's not a recipe. It's not perfect, because it will always, in the near future, exist alongside structures of domination and extraction and even genocide and hunger, you know? Those things are all still happening. But how can we focus our energy on this collective healing at the same time and not give up? And the reason I mentioned the 5-block radius on our call the other day is it's just about starting from relationships. Who do you know? Who do you love? Who loves you? What are you doing together? What do you need together? And by just asking those questions of the people either immediately geographically around you or the people you talk to often who might be across the world, especially now, what do you need? And just by starting from, I'm going to embody this world that I want to live in, invite other people into it. Maybe the world we build together is in these pockets of collective healing that exist right alongside these other structures that are really destructive. But as we create these small relational pods that are always expanding and always looking for ways to include more people in that collective healing, we're creating a global network of solidarity that's always existed. There have always been people finding ways to engage in collective practices of healing, despite the genocide, despite the war, despite whatever is plaguing our time. That's all I got.
Yeah, that's great. Wow. Yes. So what you're doing, Claire, is what Bucky Fuller said, building a new model that makes that may make, I think we could put may in there, that may make the existing model obsolete. Hopefully it will.
Yeah. Well, I think what's important to me is in my world and in the world that I create with the people I love around me, it is obsolete. It doesn't mean it's not perfectly obsolete. I'm like using a MacBook right now to record this podcast with you, right? And I'm getting, you pay me money. I'm engaged in the economy. But in terms of where my energy lies and the things I focus on, sewing and cooking and talking to people and healing together, it's almost like it is obsolete. Like we can create our reality in these pockets and in these moments where it almost doesn't matter if the system is completely toppled, because we can create new realities, even if they're fleeting.
Yes, that's right. Can I read a little bit more of the what Rupa said?
Yes, please.
She said, and this is exactly what you're talking about, and when we work together and collectively and across disciplines together, we can create a different kind of reality. I mean, what you're doing is a different reality. I see a different reality than my reality.
Yeah.
And I'm inspired by what you're doing and more moved to, look at the 5 blocks around me,
Yeah.
you know, that's an opportunity for me. And she goes on to say, we can create a health for everybody when we create a different kind of reality. When we start imagining food as a right, as it has been for thousands of years before capitalism, where our food and medicine have always been coexistent, they haven't been separated from each other. And they're still that way in many cultures around the world. When we insist upon our medicine being outside of the tiny vocabulary of pharmaceuticals, not that we abandon science, Western science, or we abandon even those pharmaceuticals, but we abandon the logic of domination that they have been structured by, and that we take back our right to have access to these things to be healthy when we need them, and that we incorporate the full range of languages and vocabularies of medicines, be they plant medicines, medicines of song, medicines of relationships, in order to achieve a vision and a reality of our health. So
There it is.
I'm saying, so these practices are not, she says, I'm not just talking about things that don't exist.
Mhm.
These are things that are active in practice in communities around the world today.
Yeah, exactly. And I want to shout out, this is going to be an incomplete list, but I want to shout out Christina Whitehawk, who is always in dialogue with us about what Cancer Talks can be. And she engages in a lot of different healing, consulting, space holding, and she's lived with cancer herself. Jan Adrian, also of Healing Journeys. These are 2 women who spend a lot of time with us, completely voluntary, talking about what we're doing, and at the bottom line, embodying a world without cancer in their own ways and in their
Yes.
own communities. And I'm excited this season and these upcoming seasons of Cancer Talks podcast to engage more deeply with Kelly Turner's Radical Remission. She has these 10 factors that cover what we eat, spending time with people we love, having strong reasons for living. And I'm so excited to talk about how each of those factors can help us embody a world without cancer.
Yes. Beautiful.
Um, yeah. And one more shout out is Donica Market Guard of Kiss the Ground and Market Guard Family Grass Fed, who was also on a podcast last year with Cheryl, because the way that she is working on regenerative agriculture and connecting to the soil and healing whole ecosystems that include people, but also include every other kind of life, is also embodying a world without cancer. There's so many examples. We could go on and on.
That's right.
But really everyone we've hosted, as they live with cancer in their bodies, I think everyone who's been on the podcast has these small ways that they are embodying a world without cancer.
Yes. This is from Jean Houston. She said at the end of this thing, she said, we have to find ways to be catalysts of transformational action in the world. And that's kind of the assignment, if there is an assignment, if you want to know what to do. I was listening to an interview with Zach Bush, Dr. Zach Bush, and Joel Salatin, America's favorite farmer. And if you don't know who they are, you look them up. They're 2 amazing people. And they had a prescription they were answering a question, and it was, what can people do, to deal with the big problems that we have today? And they said 3 things, and then Zach added a 4th. The first, and they both agreed, they both were saying the same thing. And the first one was to grow something, an oregano plant in your kitchen window, or a garden, or something on the balcony if you live in Brooklyn. Go into your kitchen. Don't go back. Go in to your kitchen. Some people may never have been in the kitchen, and cook for yourself. And the third thing was meet a farmer and support that farmer. And then Zach added the 4th thing, which was and eat your meals, enjoy your meals in community with another person at least. And that is one way that Jean Houston says that we need to find ways to be catalysts of transformational action in the world. And what their prescription was one of the ways.
Yeah. And I think that I've always wanted to be that, a catalyst for transformation in the world. And hearing your story, you have too, for a very long time, wanted to be that catalyst. I think what we're often taught that to be a catalyst, you have to be in a position of power. If you want to change the world, run for president, you know?
Right.
I mean, that's the silliest version, but work your way up the ladder so that you can lead people for better.
Yeah.
But the problem is the ladder is a hierarchy and it gets you stuck on the ladder where you're just trying to get higher.
Right.
And we forget it's almost impossible to remember when you're trying to climb the ladder that you even were doing that because you wanted to catalyze change. And so what's been
Yeah.
So my journey, I know I'm only 25 years old, but my journey has been one of humility, of realizing again and again in these different ways how I was actually buying into that logic of domination. In what ways I was actually just trying to get quote unquote ahead or become the best or build my resume so that I would be qualified enough to make change. And especially in these pandemic years, I've learned so many lessons of letting go of those goals, being in a power position or getting more followers on Instagram or whatever it is. And now I'm just trying to embody the world that I want to live in.
Yes, it's beautiful. That's so beautiful.
And whoever wants to embody it with me, I'm always looking out for people who want to embody the same world.
Yes.
But yeah.
Me too. That's beautiful, Claire.
Right? We don't have to be the big wigs to catalyze change. Everyone can catalyze change from exactly where they're at.
Yeah. Who was it that said the little individual? That Goethe quote.
Oh, yeah.
Margaret Mead.
Nice. Yeah, the little individual who is not an individual, but is part of a collective.
Well, honestly, I can't think of a better person than you to have this dialogue with. And I love I was going to say generational divide. I don't feel that way now.
I love our intergenerational dialogue.
Oh, there you go. Yes. I love our intergenerational dialogue. That's the way that change can happen. That's the way that we can do what we're talking about, which is embodying a world without cancer. So anyway, thank you for today, Claire. It was just fantastic. Love talking with you. Yeah.
Yeah. To be continued.
To be continued, yes.
If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a review in your podcast app. Cancer Talks is a platform for anyone who has been touched by cancer. If you'd like to be in community with other cancer thrivers seeking personal transformation, join us for free workshops on Zoom. Visit CancerTalks.com to register. If you're moved to donate, please visit patreon.com/CancerTalks.